The glow of Michael's 12-foot Christmas tree shimmered in the corner, its lights reflecting against the polished marble coffee table. Dennis Brown sat carefully on the edge of the leather sofa, hands folded, trying to mask the nervous anticipation stirring inside him. For weeks, he had imagined this night sharing turkey laughter and the familiar sound of carols with his only son. It had been years since the house felt like family, and Dennis had pinned his hopes on this Christmas. "I could bring my famous smoked turkey," he said gently, leaning back as though the words could fill the distance that had grown between them. "The one with cornbread stuffing your mother's favorite. Remember how she used to say it was better than her grandmother's recipe?" The air between them grew heavy. Michael shifted uncomfortably, his shoulders drawing inward. His wedding ring caught the glow of the lights, a silent reminder of his loyalty elsewhere. "Dad," his voice faltered, then firmed, "you won't be welcome here for Christmas." The words struck like a hammer to glass, shattering the fragile hope Dennis had carried. He blinked, waiting for laughter, for Michael to confess it was a cruel joke. But Michael's eyes stayed fixed on the table, refusing to meet his father's. "What do you mean?" Dennis asked, his voice calm but trembling beneath the surface. "Why wouldn't I be welcome?" Michael swallowed hard. "Isabella's parents are coming, and they'd prefer if you weren't here. They'd prefer." Dennis repeated slowly, tasting the poison in the phrase. His gaze swept the room, the silk curtains he had paid for when Isabella wanted more privacy, the hardwood floors financed with his second mortgage, the crown molding that had maxed out his credit card. Every inch of this house bore the imprint of his sacrifice, and yet he was being told his presence was unwelcome. "It's just easier this way, Dad," Michael continued, voice shrinking. "You know how her family is about traditions. They have their own way of doing things." Dennis's eyes narrowed. He recognized the code. He had heard it all his life, their own way, our kind of people fitting the atmosphere. Words that disguised the truth that his dark skin, his history, his culture would never be good enough at their table. Through the archway, he spotted Isabella's gleaming kitchen mixer, the kind that cost more than he spent on groceries in a month. He had paid for that too. He had paid for nearly everything. But what was priceless, his dignity, his belonging, had been casually stripped away. "And what way is that?" Michael Dennis asked, his voice, measured eyes, sharp. Michael flinched. "Dad, please, don't make this harder." Dennis stood his knees aching from decades of construction work. He walked slowly toward the door, past family photographs, where his face appeared smaller in each frame, as if he were being erased. He rested his hand on the knob, its brass cold against his palm. He wanted to speak calmly, but the weight in his chest demanded release. "Tell Isabella's parents," he said without turning. "Merry Christmas." The December night slapped his face with icy air as he stepped outside. Behind him, the door clicked shut, final absolute. He paused on the driveway, staring at the twinkling lights of houses, where families welcomed fathers and grandfathers with open arms. His truck's engine rumbled to life, but Dennis sat still, letting the cold seep in. Inside that house he had built, he would never belong, not because of what he lacked, but because of the color he carried. The road stretched ahead, dark and lonely, yet strangely honest. For the first time, Dennis understood this Christmas was not about family. It was about facing the truth of what family had chosen to reject him. The heater in Dennis's truck groaned as he steered through the frozen streets of Spokane. Christmas lights glittered in windows, painting the night in colors that mocked his mood. Every house he passed seemed to whisper of warmth of family gathered together while he drove into solitude. At the red light on 29th and Grand, Dennis's eyes caught a young black father loading brightly wrapped gifts into the back of his SUV. Two little girls pressed their noses against the frosted glass, their laughter spilling into the cold. Dennis's chest tightened. Once that had been him and Michael, before the money, before Isabella, before he became nothing more than a walking wallet whose skin was too dark for their dinner table. The numbers began tumbling through his head, unstoppable. $2,800 every month for 5 years. His calculator had surrendered long ago, but Dennis knew the total nearly $140,000. More than he and his late wife Maria had saved their entire lives. Gone. He gripped the steering wheel tighter, recalling each sacrifice. The first mortgage he refinanced to cover their down payment. The second loan for hardwood floors, Isabella insisted, were essential for resale value. The new roof, the landscaping, the furniture, every decision framed as investment, but always paid with his sweat. He had worked construction since he was 18, laying bricks under the blistering sun, repairing roofs in rainstorms, skin and muscles worn thin by labor. And yet none of that sweat had bought him a seat at their table. His truck turned onto 5th Street, where he remembered walking out of the bank papers in hand after signing away his house as collateral. The loan officer's voice still echoed, "Mr. Brown, you're putting a lot on the line. Are you sure?" At the time, Dennis had smiled, confident that sacrifice for family was always the right choice. Now he realized what the man had really meant. You're risking everything for people who don't see your worth. The memory of Maria's laughter drifted into his thoughts. She used to tell him he gave too much, that love needed boundaries as much as generosity. But Dennis had believed that giving more was proof of his place in their world. And then cancer had taken her, leaving him alone to play both parent and protector. Without her, the line between love and exploitation blurred until he could no longer see it. Dennis pulled into his cracked driveway, the same driveway he had ignored repairing, because every spare dollar vanished into Michael and Isabella's perfect suburban fantasy. The porch light flickered overhead, another repair long postponed. He sat for a moment in the cab, staring at the modest house that carried decades of memories. It wasn't polished, it wasn't grand, but it was his. Unlike Michael's house, every corner here had been built with sweat and paid with dignity. Inside, the silence greeted him like an old companion. The air felt thin, hollow, missing Maria's presence. He poured himself a glass of water and stared at the kitchen counter, scarred with years of use. The contrast between this and Isabella's pristine granite countertops, counters he had paid for, cut deeper than he wanted to admit. His phone vibrated against the table. Isabella's name lit the screen. He let it ring, knowing what waited on the other end. False sweetness, the same tone she used when asking him to cover property taxes or utility bills. He pressed decline. Dennis's gaze fell to the stack of envelopes piled on his desk. Bank statements, receipts, payment confirmations. A paper trail of devotion that no one had respected. He picked one up, fingers trembling. December 15th, $2,800 transferred automatically to their mortgage account. January 15th, $2,800. February, March, April. The cycle endless, mechanical, draining him month after month. And for what? To be told he didn't belong because his skin didn't fit their traditions. To have his food called too heavy, his music too loud, his very presence uncomfortable. Dennis lowered into his chair, staring at the documents spread before him. Each line was a confession of weakness, each signature a surrender. But as he studied them, something shifted. These weren't just receipts of financial ruin, they were proof of his loyalty, his sacrifice, his humanity. Proof that could one day expose the hypocrisy of those who rejected him. The clock ticked toward midnight. Outside, a neighbor's home glowed with laughter, the muffled sound of Christmas carols carrying into the still night. Dennis closed his eyes and inhaled. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to feel the burn of anger, not as shame, but as clarity. He had been exploited because he wanted to be loved. He had been erased because of the color of his skin. But the ledger was closing, and the man who had given everything was no longer willing to pay the price of silence. The phone rang again the next morning, its shrill tone cutting through the winter quiet. Dennis glanced at the screen, Isabella. He considered ignoring it, but something in him, curiosity, maybe anger, compelled him to answer. "Dennis," she began, syrup-coating her voice, the same syrup she used when she wanted new drapes or a bill covered. "I wanted to clear up yesterday's misunderstanding with Michael." Dennis leaned against his kitchen counter, arms folded. "Misunderstanding. You made yourselves clear." There was a pause, the faint rustle of shopping bags in the background. "Look, my parents have high expectations. They're very traditional. They value refinement atmosphere. You understand?" "Do I?" Dennis asked evenly. "They're not used to—" She hesitated, then pressed forward. "They're not used to your kind of food." All that heavy soul food, the collard greens, cornbread, fried chicken, it's not what they serve in our circles. And the music, that gospel stuff you play, it's loud. Dennis felt his chest tighten, but he kept his voice level. My kind of food, my kind of music. You mean the meals you ate every Sunday for years when money was tight, the music you clapped along to when you needed hope. That was different. Isabella snapped the honey in her tone, dissolving. We were appreciative then. But with my parents here, we can't risk embarrassment. The word hung between them like a noose. Embarrassment. She meant the color of his skin, the heritage in his cooking, the history carried in every note of his music. You don't want a black man at your table, Dennis said softly. Silence. Then a brittle laugh. Don't be dramatic, Dennis. This isn't about race. It's about class. My father graduated summa cum laude. My mother speaks 4 languages. They summer in the Hamptons. What would you contribute to the conversation? Stories about construction work. Heat flared through Dennis's chest. He had built homes from the ground up, roofs over heads, communities brick by brick. Yet to her, his life's work meant nothing compared to pedigrees and cocktail chatter. I built a business from nothing. He replied, his voice low and steady. I've employed dozens of people, paid more taxes than your father made in his best year. Money isn't everything, Isabella countered quickly. Breeding matters. Education matters. And frankly, your wife Maria understood her place better than you do. The words sliced through him. Her place. Maria, who had raised Michael with grace, who had endured whispers and stares for marrying a black man. Maria, who carried herself with dignity until her final breath. Dennis's voice dropped into something unfamiliar, something steel-hard. What did you just say about my wife? I'm just saying she blended in better. She didn't make waves. Maria had more class in her little finger than your entire family tree. Dennis said, his hand tightening around the phone. Oh, please, Isabella scoffed. She was a house cleaner who got lucky. At least she had the sense to stay quiet. Something in Dennis snapped not with rage, but with clarity. The mask had fallen away, and Isabella's polished cruelty stood naked in the daylight. This conversation, he said coldly, is over. We're done pretending to be family. You can't just... We're done. Dennis ended the call, placing the phone carefully on the counter. Around him, the house felt smaller, but strangely lighter, as though the walls themselves had shed a weight. For years he had bitten his tongue, swallowed insults, pretended not to notice the subtle slights. Now the slights were no longer subtle. Now they had names. He walked to his desk and opened a manila folder stuffed with papers. Bank statements, mortgage slips, receipts for renovations he would never enjoy. Each page whispered of sacrifice, of devotion, of being used. Dennis laid them out like evidence, each number a testament to what he had given and what had been stolen. The silence of the house pressed close, but for the first time in years, it didn't feel empty. It felt resolute. The truth had been spoken. The mask had shattered. And Dennis knew what had to come next. No more silence, no more surrender. Dennis sat at his desk long after the call ended, the winter light fading into shadow around him. The stack of papers spread across the table glowed faintly under the lamp. Bank statements, mortgage receipts, payment confirmations. Each page felt like a confession, 5 years of obedience, 5 years of feeding a machine that never acknowledged his humanity. He picked up the phone and dialed the bank. The line clicked, and a cheerful recorded voice offered options in English and Spanish. How thoughtful, Dennis thought bitterly. A system built to sound accommodating, while men like him bled their futures dry. Customer service, this is Jennifer. How can I help you today? I need to cancel an automatic transfer, Dennis said, steady as stone. Of course, sir. May I have your account number? He read the digits slowly, his hands surprisingly calm. He expected them to shake to betray nerves after years of being chained to this payment. But his fingers didn't tremble. I see the transfer, Jennifer confirmed. $2,800 monthly to Wells Fargo account, ending in 7423. How long have you been making this payment? 5 years, Dennis replied. The words tasted bitter like rust on his tongue. and you'd like it canceled effective immediately. Dennis looked around his kitchen, the outdated stove, the paint peeling near the window, the fridge that hummed louder than it should. All neglected because every spare dollar had gone into Isabella's dream palace. Effective immediately, he said. Done, Jennifer answered. Is there anything else I can help you with? Dennis exhaled slowly, the air leaving him like the release of a long-held breath. No, he said, and for the first time in years, the word felt good, final, free. He hung up and leaned back in his chair. Silence filled the house, but it was no longer hollow. It was purposeful. He gathered the papers, the relics of his martyrdom, and carried them to the fireplace. One match. A flicker of flame. The pages curled and blackened years of servitude dissolving into smoke. Dennis watched the ashes scatter upward, warm on his face. The fire was more than heat. It was a ritual, a cleansing. His phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Michael, Dad. Can we talk? Dennis didn't answer. Another message followed. Isabella. Thinks you're overreacting. Let's figure this out. He set the phone face down. Enough words had been wasted. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, the good bottle he had been saving for a special occasion. Tonight was special enough. Raising it toward Maria's photo on the mantel, he whispered Merry Christmas to me. For the first time in years, he meant it. The next morning arrived crisp and cold sunlight spilling across Dennis's modest kitchen. He sipped his coffee slowly, savoring the quiet. For the first time in years, he wasn't calculating how much would disappear from his account in a matter of days. Freedom had a taste rich, strong, and undeniable. The phone rang at exactly 10:47 a.m. Dennis glanced at the screen. Isabella. He smiled to himself, set his mug down, and answered. Dennis, she said briskly, no sweetness this time. I need you to pick up my parents from the airport. Their flight from Portland lands at 2. Alaska Air Carousel 3. You're the only one available during the day. Dennis's eyebrows lifted. The audacity stunned even him. Less than 24 hours after telling him he wasn't good enough for her dinner table, she expected him to be her chauffeur. Why are you asking me? He asked quietly. Because that's what family does, Isabella replied, irritation sharp in her voice. They help each other, and let's be honest. Her pause was deliberate cruel. You're not my rival. You're too weak to be my rival. Just get in your truck and pick them up. The words hung heavy, a dagger wrapped in false authority. Dennis could almost see her nails tapping on her pristine granite countertop, the one he had paid for issuing commands like a queen to her servant. What airline? He repeated calmly. Alaska Air Flight 447. Isabella said, her tone clipped. And Dennis, wear something decent. Maybe that blue shirt you wore to Michael's graduation. My parents noticed those details. Don't embarrass us. The line went dead. Not a thank you, not even pretense of courtesy. Just entitlement sharpened by the edge of racial disdain. Dennis placed the phone on the table and leaned back in his chair. The sunlight caught his face, warming skin that had carried decades of labor and prejudice. Too weak to be her rival. He almost laughed. If she only knew. He poured another cup of coffee, added an extra spoonful of sugar, and opened yesterday's newspaper. He studied the crossword puzzle he hadn't finished. Across 7 delayed gratification, 12 letters. He tapped the pen against the page. Postponement. He murmured the answer, sliding neatly into place. Yes, some victories required patience. And Isabella was about to learn that Dennis Brown's patience had finally reached its limit. By 2 o'clock, Spokane International Airport buzzed with holiday chaos, families hugging children, dragging stuffed animals, luggage wheels clattering across polished floors. But Dennis was nowhere near it. Instead, he sat in his favorite armchair, a steaming cup of Earl Grey at his side, the crossword puzzle from yesterday finally completed. Sunlight filtered through his blinds, painting the room in soft gold. He felt no rush, no obligation. For the first time in years, his time belonged solely to him. At 2:15, his phone vibrated on the coffee table. Isabella. He let it ring. By 2:47, another call. "Dad, where are you? My parents are waiting." The preview text cut off as Dennis turned the phone face down. He flipped to the sports section. The Seahawks had lost again. Some things never changed. By 3:30, his phone had buzzed 6 more times. Isabella, unknown numbers, probably her parents borrowing a stranger's phone. Dennis brewed another pot of tea, organized his junk drawer, and marveled at how much life expanded when he stopped shrinking himself for others. At 3:45, the pounding began. Not a polite knock, a violent hammering that rattled the doorframe. Dennis set down his tea, walked slowly to the entrance, and peered through the peephole. 3 figures crowded his porch like wolves circling prey. Cody Jenkins, red-faced with fury, Catherine, lips pressed into a thin line, and Isabella, her makeup-smeared coat rumpled. Dennis opened the door a crack. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Cody bellowed, shoving past him into the living room without waiting for permission. Catherine followed her voice, dripping venom. "We waited at that airport for 3 hours. This is barbaric behavior for someone your age." Isabella stormed in last, her voice shrill. "You humiliated us. Do you have any idea what you've done? My parents had to take a taxi like common people, $40 because you decided to act petty." Dennis closed the door behind them with deliberate calm, then spoke, his tone a blade. "Excuse me." The words sliced through their shouting. Silence fell brittle and sharp. "This is my house," Dennis said quietly, "and I want you out." Catherine's chin lifted, condescension etched into every syllable. "Dennis, you clearly don't understand. My husband has connections, social connections, business connections. You can't treat people like us this way without consequences." Dennis's eyes locked on hers. "Then consider this a lesson in consequences for arrogance, for entitlement, for treating me like a servant because of my skin." Isabella's mouth fell open. "A lesson. You think you can teach us anything? You're nobody. I'm someone who finally stopped being your personal bank account and chauffeur," Dennis replied, stepping aside to hold the door wide. "The lesson is over. You can leave." Cody jabbed a finger at his chest, rage quivering in his voice. "You have no idea who you're messing with, old man. We can make your life very difficult." Dennis didn't blink. "Is that a threat?" "It's a promise," Cody hissed. "Abandoning elderly people at an airport. You think that won't follow you? You're going to regret this." Dennis's gaze was steady, unflinching. "Get out." They filed out muttering, but Cody turned at the threshold, his face twisted with fury. "Mark my words, Brown. You'll regret this." The door shut with a decisive click. Dennis leaned against it, breathing in the silence. For the first time, the house didn't feel empty. It felt cleansed. Their presence had been a stain, and now it was gone. But their words lingered, connections, consequences, regret. Dennis knew this wasn't over. The war they had declared in whispers was about to spill into the open. 3 mornings later, Dennis sat at his kitchen table with a steaming mug of coffee. The Spokane Review lay folded beside him, the black and white text a familiar comfort. But when he turned to page 3, his hand froze. There, staring back at him, was his own face, an old photo pulled from his company website. The headline screamed, "Local Black Businessman Abandons Elderly Couple at Airport During Holiday Storm." Dennis read the first lines, his stomach turning. Cody and Catherine Jenkins, portrayed as helpless victims, claimed they had been stranded in freezing conditions when family member Dennis Brown failed to appear for a scheduled pickup. Words like erratic behavior and mental instability threaded through the paragraphs, painting him as dangerous, unreliable. The temperature had been 52 degrees and sunny that day. There had been no storm. But facts didn't matter when the story was crafted to fit a narrative the city was already primed to believe a black man failing white respectability. Dennis set the paper down slowly, fighting the urge to crush it in his fists. The byline belonged to Patricia Morrison, lifestyle editor. He didn't recognize the name, but he recognized the tactic. Cody had leveraged his banking connections, pulled strings to place this smear where it would sting most in the hearts of Spokane's polite society. He read the article again, this time noting what wasn't there. No mention of the 5 years of mortgage payments. No mention of the down payment, the renovations, the bills he had covered. No mention of being told he wasn't welcome at Christmas dinner because of atmosphere. The story was stripped of context, reshaped into a morality tale where he was the villain and the Jenkinses the innocent. He stared out the window watching snowflakes drift lazily through the air. He had seen this pattern before, in his younger days when cops pulled him over for driving too nice a car. At job sites when clients mistook him for a laborer instead of the owner. In stores when clerks followed him with suspicious eyes. Always the same black men cast as threats, their side of the story erased. But this time, he wouldn't swallow it. This time he would fight. Dennis pushed the paper aside and powered up his laptop. He began typing names into search bars. Cody Jenkins, Catherine Jenkins, Isabella Brown. Social media accounts opened like windows into hypocrisy, photos of vacations, new jewelry, lavish dinners, all financed by the money he had bled. He clicked through connections, tracing their digital footprints, mapping their influence. Then he turned to Michael's LinkedIn profile. A recent connection glowed on the screen. Patricia Morrison, lifestyle editor, Spokane Review. The puzzle clicked into place. The smear had been carefully planted. Dennis leaned back in his chair, the pieces arranging themselves in his mind. Cody and Catherine thought they were playing chess, but they had underestimated the man who had spent 40 years navigating prejudice, who had built a business in a world designed to see him fail. He closed the newspaper, folded it neatly, and set it on the table. The smear was public. So would be his response. This wasn't about airport pickups anymore. It wasn't even about Christmas dinner. This was about dignity, his and every black man's, who had been told to sit quietly while lies painted them as villains. Dennis sipped his coffee, the bitterness sharp but clarifying. They had declared war. He was ready. The winter sun slanted through Dennis's blinds as he spread papers across the dining table. It looked less like a kitchen and more like a war room. Bank statements lay in neat rows, each one marked with yellow highlights. Mortgage transfers, utility payments, checks for renovations, all totaling more than $200,000. Evidence not just of sacrifice, but of exploitation. He moved methodically like a lawyer preparing for trial. In a sense, he was. This would be his courtroom, and the jury would be everyone who had ever believed Cody Jenkins's lies. He clipped each packet carefully, statements first, receipts second, photographs last. The photos were the most damning. Isabella smiling in front of her granite countertops, captioned, "Our Dream Kitchen." Cody raising a glass of champagne on the deck, boasting about hard work paying off. Catherine posting a vacation selfie in Cancun with hashtags about living blessed. Every image, every boast had been funded by Dennis's hands, his labor, his silence. He printed them all. At the top of each stack, he placed a copy of the newspaper article that had smeared his name. In the margins, he wrote in red ink, "Lie, false, missing context." He underlined the phrase, "erratic behavior," and scrawled, "Truth refused to be their servant." He circled holiday storm and added, "Weather 52 degrees and sunny." The rhythm of his pen grew steady, almost meditative. For years, he had bent under the weight of prejudice, swallowing insults, minimizing slights, trying to appear agreeable. Now his handwriting carved the truth into paper. Dennis paused and glanced at Maria's photo on the mantel. Her smile steadied him. She had always believed in quiet dignity and turning the other cheek, but even Maria had known that dignity wasn't submission. It was standing when others tried to bow you. He whispered to her photo, "It's time." He filled a thick manila folder with the evidence, then another, and another. By the time he finished, 12 identical packets sat on the table, one for every guest expected at Isabella's Christmas Eve dinner. Each packet a story in black and white, the exploitation, the racism, the erasure. Each packet a mirror waiting to be held up to the so-called refined family. He sat back in his chair, exhaustion and resolve mingling. His plan wasn't vengeance. It was revelation. He wasn't going to shout or rage or lower himself to the stereotypes they loved to invoke. He was going to tell the truth calmly, clearly, undeniably. The truth would be his weapon, and the very society that believed Cody's smear would be forced to face it. Dennis closed the final folder, stacked them neatly, and slid them into his old leather briefcase. The latch clicked shut with satisfying finality. On the wall, his calendar showed the date, circled in red, December 24th. Not a holiday for him this year, but a reckoning. Tomorrow night, the truth would sit at their table. The night before Christmas Eve, Dennis sat in the back pew of Mount Olive Baptist Church. The sanctuary was quiet, the scent of old hymnals and pine garlands heavy in the air. He hadn't been here in weeks, too consumed by betrayal and bitterness. But tonight, he needed grounding. Reverend Harris noticed him and walked over his gate slow but steady. "Dennis," he said softly, lowering himself onto the pew. "You've been carrying a storm." Dennis exhaled. "They tried to erase me, not just from their table, but from the truth. And they did it because of what I look like." Harris nodded, eyes kind but unflinching. "That's been our story for generations, brother. But you don't fight a lie with rage, you fight it with truth. Truth is louder, longer, stronger." From the corner, Sister Lillian approached with a thermos of sweet tea. "You make sure when you speak you don't give them the show they expect," she said firmly. "They want you angry wild, so they can call you every name they've rehearsed. Don't give them that." Dennis looked down at his hands, rough from decades of construction, now trembling slightly. "So I just stand there calm while they spit in my face?" "No," Harris replied. "You stand there calm while you show the evidence. Let their own words, their own posts, their own greed condemn them. That's how you win." For a long moment, Dennis said nothing. Then he nodded. "I've prepared packets, documents, receipts, photos, 12 copies, one for each guest." Lillian smiled faintly. "Then you're ready." "Don't think of it as revenge, Dennis. Think of it as testimony, a testimony that can't be silenced." The three of them bowed their heads in a brief prayer. When Dennis opened his eyes, the weight in his chest had shifted. The anger was still there, but it had been tempered into something sharper, cleaner resolve. The next morning he rehearsed his words in front of the mirror. He avoided phrases dripping with rage, replaced them with steady truth. "I supported them for 5 years. I was told my black presence was unwelcome. This is the reality you deserve to see." He pictured Isabella's friends, Cody's colleagues, Catherine's charity companions, polite society faces who believed they knew refinement. He imagined placing the packets before them, letting their eyes widen as numbers, dates, and photographs tore holes in the story they'd been fed. Dennis buttoned his navy suit jacket, the same one he'd worn at Maria's funeral, pressed, polished, dignified. Tonight it would serve another kind of farewell, the burial of silence. He set the briefcase by the door and glanced once more at Maria's photo. "Wish me strength," he whispered. Her smile seemed to answer, "It's already in you." Tomorrow the truth would arrive dressed in dignity, and no storm of lies could wash it away. The streets of Kendall Yards glittered with holiday lights, wreaths on every door, laughter spilling from houses where families gathered. Dennis parked across from Michael and Isabella's home, the glow of their dining room visible through tall windows. Cars lined the driveway, proof of guests already seated. He checked his watch. 6:45. Perfect. Late enough that dinner had begun, early enough to lock everyone in their seats. Dennis straightened his navy suit jacket, lifted the worn leather briefcase from the passenger seat, and stepped out into the December chill. His shoes crunched over the frosted sidewalk. Each step felt measured, deliberate, like the slow toll of a bell before judgment. At the front door, he paused. Isabella always bragged about the safety of their neighborhood, leaving doors unlocked as if it proved they were above danger. Dennis turned the knob. It opened easily. Warmth washed over him, heat from the fireplace, the scent of roasted turkey, the hum of conversation. He followed the sound into the dining room. 12 faces turned toward him at once. Forks froze midair. Isabella, seated at the head of the table in a shimmering dress, went pale. Her wineglass hovered halfway to her lips. Michael's face drained of color. Cody and Catherine stiffened, eyes wide, as if they'd seen a ghost. Dennis set his briefcase on the marble sideboard with a calmness that silenced the room further. "Good evening," he said evenly, his voice carrying without strain. "I hope you don't mind me joining your Christmas celebration." Dennis Isabella snapped, voice high, brittle. "This is inappropriate. You need to leave. Now." "Actually," Dennis replied, opening the briefcase and pulling out the first packet, "I think your guests deserve to know who really paid for this celebration, this house, this lifestyle you've all admired tonight." A woman Dennis didn't recognize, pearls around her neck. Charity luncheon refinement in her smile leaned forward. curiosity sparking. "What's he talking about, Isabella?" "He's having some kind of episode," Isabella said quickly, panic edging her tone. "Michael, call someone." But Dennis was already moving around the table, placing a packet of documents in front of each guest. His steps were unhurried, deliberate, the soft rustle of paper loud in the silence. "Here are the records," Dennis said calmly. 5 years of mortgage payments, $2,800 each month. The down payment for this home, renovations, furniture, appliances. Every luxury you've admired here tonight was paid from my account." The room rippled with whispers. Forks clinked against plates. Guests leaned over the papers, scanning the highlighted numbers, the photographs, the annotated article clipped at the top. Dennis returned to the head of the table, standing tall. And here he continued, lifting a copy of the newspaper article. "Is what your gracious host told the city about me." He laid it gently before them. The words erratic behavior and abandoned elderly couple stared up in stark black ink, his red notes circling lies. The air shifted. Polite society had been handed evidence. The facade was cracking. Dennis folded his hands calmly behind his back, his gaze sweeping the room. Now he said, his voice steady, sharp as glass, "Let's talk about who the real manipulators are in this family." For a moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the faint crinkle of paper as guests flipped through the packets. Eyes widened, brows furrowed, forks were set down with soft clinks. "This is outrageous," murmured a man in a tailored sweater staring at a highlighted bank transfer. "Isabella, why didn't you mention any of this?" Isabella forced a brittle laugh. "He volunteered." "We never asked." Actually, Dennis cut in, pulling another sheet from his briefcase. "You did ask. Every time a payment was due, every time a new essential appeared. And when I finally said no, you called me unstable. You called me unfit to sit at your table because I am a black man who doesn't fit your definition of refinement." The room chilled. Catherine's hand tightened around her wine glass. "That's not." Dennis lifted his phone screen, glowing. "Shall I read Isabella's texts? The ones where she worried my soul food would embarrass her parents. Or the one where she said, 'We can't have gospel music around them. It's too loud, too black.'" A sharp intake of breath rippled around the table. Guests exchanged glances, their curiosity shifting to discomfort. Cody's face flushed crimson. "You're twisting everything. This man has serious issues. Look at him barging into a Christmas dinner, making accusations." Dennis leaned forward, his voice low but carrying. "The only issue here is your arrogance. You took my money, my labor, my love for my son, and treated it like tribute from a servant. And when I stopped, you tried to erase me with lies." Michael finally spoke, his voice breaking. "Dad, I didn't know about the newspaper article." Dennis's eyes softened briefly, but his tone stayed firm. "Your wife knew. Her parents orchestrated it. They painted me as a dangerous black man, the old story Spokane loves to hear, and you stayed silent." One of Catherine's friends, an older woman in pearls, tapped her packet with a trembling finger. "Cody, this shows over $200,000. He kept you afloat, and you repay him by slandering him in print." "This is a family matter," Isabella blurted, panic rising. "It's private." "No," Dennis said sharply, standing taller. "It stopped being private the moment you dragged my name into the newspaper. You made me public. Now the truth is public too." He turned to the guests, his gaze steady, deliberate. "I want you all to understand something. This isn't just about money. It's about a family that looked me in the eye, called me father, and still decided I was unworthy because of my skin. They wanted my labor, not my presence. My sacrifice, not my company. That is racism dressed up as refinement." Silence fell heavy. Even the fire in the hearth seemed to dim. Around the table, guests shifted uncomfortably, realizing they were witnessing the collapse of a carefully curated facade. Dennis closed his briefcase and straightened his tie. "Enjoy the rest of your dinner," he said evenly. "It's the last one I'll ever pay for." He turned toward the door. Behind him, whispers rose into arguments, questions colliding with excuses. The sound of social armor cracking filled the air. Dennis walked away without looking back. Dennis stepped into the cold night air, the briefcase swinging lightly at his side. Behind him, the Jenkins home throbbed with raised voices, anger, disbelief, desperate attempts to patch a sinking ship. He didn't need to stay to hear the outcome. The cracks were visible in every guest's face, and the truth had already done its work. Across the street, he paused beside his truck. Through the frosted window, he saw shadows moving in the dining room, Cody gesturing wildly, Catherine clutching her pearls, Isabella pacing like a caged animal. Michael sat with his head bowed, shoulders slumped. The empire they had built on arrogance and deceit was crumbling under the weight of facts. Dennis lit the engine, but didn't drive away immediately. He wanted the moment to sink in the image of their perfect dinner, unraveling their prestige, dissolving under scrutiny. For years, they had reduced him to a stereotype, an outsider, a problem. Tonight, he had turned their own weapons status reputation against them. The following week, Spokane buzzed with whispers. At the country club, members traded stories about Cody Jenkins, the banker who had bled his black in-law dry and then smeared him in the press. At charity luncheons, Catherine's name brought tight smiles and quick subject changes. Isabella's social media fell silent, her once constant stream of blessed life posts conspicuously absent. For Dennis, the fallout felt strangely quiet. His phone rang often, Michael calling Isabella, calling even Cody once, but he let them all go to voicemail. He didn't need to hear excuses or threats. The evidence had spoken louder than words. One afternoon, while picking up groceries, Dennis overheard two women in line whispering about the scandal. Can you imagine, one said, clutching her purse. All that money, and they treated him like staff. Worse than staff, the other replied. At least staff get paid. Dennis didn't smile, but a warmth spread through his chest. For once, the whispers carried truth. Still, he remained cautious. Cody's parting words echoed in his mind. Connections, consequences, regret. Men like Cody didn't yield easily. They pulled strings, called in favors, hid behind polished smiles. Dennis knew the war wasn't finished. Yet something had shifted within him. He no longer felt like a man cornered. He felt like a man who had finally stepped into the center of his own story. That night he poured another glass of whiskey and sat on his porch, watching the stars glint over Spokane. For the first time in years, the future didn't feel like a trap. It felt like a horizon. The facade was broken. The lies were exposed. And Dennis Brown was no longer the silent, obedient man at the edge of the photograph. He was the one holding the lens. Spring crept into Spokane with the smell of thawed earth and budding trees. For most families, it meant renewal. For Michael and Isabella, it meant collapse. Dennis received the letter on a Tuesday morning, delivered by certified mail. The envelope carried the heavy stamp of legal authority. Inside, in crisp black print, it read, "Notice of default. Final demand for payment. 3 months of missed mortgage payments had caught up with them. $8,400 in arrears. 14 days to bring the account current or face foreclosure." Dennis set the letter on his kitchen table beside his coffee mug. He read it once, then again, the words as cold and impersonal as the people who had driven him to this point. Then he folded it neatly and placed it back in the envelope. Their crisis was no longer his burden. The phone calls started that evening. Isabella's number first blocked after her second frantic voicemail. Then Cody's, his voice dripping with veiled threats that cracked into desperation. Finally, Michael's. His son left message after message, each more strained than the last. Dennis didn't answer. He was done being their safety net. 97 days after Christmas, a knock came at his door. When Dennis opened it, Michael stood on the porch looking 10 years older. His once sharp suit hung wrinkled dark circles rimmed his eyes, and the arrogance that had always armored his voice was gone. Dad Michael said quietly, "We need to talk." Dennis stepped aside, watching as his son entered, glancing around the house as though seeing it for the first time. The repaired porch light glowed overhead. New furniture filled the living room. The walls gleamed with fresh paint. Every detail was proof of what Dennis had managed once he stopped pouring money into someone else's fantasy. "Nice place," Michael murmured. "It's what happens," Dennis replied evenly, "when you spend money on yourself instead of people who don't respect you." Michael lowered himself onto the couch, hands clasped tight. "Dad, I need you to know I'm sorry. For Christmas, for the article, for the way Isabella's parents, the way we treated you." Dennis sat across from him, arms folded. "Go on. I didn't know about the newspaper story until afterward, I swear. But I should have known. I should have defended you years ago, and I didn't. I let them—" Michael trailed off, raking a hand through his hair. "I let them make me believe your place was outside the table. Like you were only there to pay, not to belong." The words cut, even softened by guilt. Dennis's jaw tightened. "That's exactly what you did. You sold me out for their approval, for whiteness dressed as respectability." Michael's voice cracked. "The house is in foreclosure. We can't make the payments. Without your help, we're going to lose everything." Dennis's eyes hardened. "Then you'll lose it, because I'm not paying $1 more to people who treat me like a servant in my own family." Michael's face crumpled. "Dad, please. I've already lost so much." Dennis leaned forward, his voice quiet but unwavering. "You didn't lose me, son. You gave me away, and now you're standing here asking me to buy you back. But some things can't be bought." For the first time, Michael looked his father in the eyes, tears brimming. "Is there any way back? Any way you can forgive me?" Dennis paused, studying the man he had raised. Forgiveness, he realized, had already come. But forgiveness didn't mean rescue. "I forgive you," Dennis said softly. "But forgiveness doesn't rebuild houses or respect. That part is on you." Michael sat stiffly on the couch, eyes fixed on the floor, as if searching for words buried in the carpet fibers. Dennis waited silent, arms folded. He had spent too many years filling silences with generosity. Tonight, he let the weight rest where it belonged on his son. Finally, Michael spoke. "I've been thinking about Mom, about how she never let anyone shame her for loving you. She faced Whisper's side eyes, but she never flinched. And I didn't inherit her courage." Dennis's throat tightened. Maria's memory was a wound that never fully healed. "Your mother," he said slowly, carried herself with dignity because she knew her worth. And she expected others to recognize it. "That's what you forgot." Michael looked up, eyes glistening. "I thought if I kept Isabella happy, if I kept her parents impressed, I'd prove I belonged. But all I did was prove I was willing to betray the man who raised me." Dennis leaned forward, his tone firm but not unkind. "And now you're here because you've lost their respect anyway. That's the thing about prejudice, son. It doesn't stop eating once it's fed. You can give them money, loyalty, silence. It will never be enough. Not when the color of my skin makes them see me as less, and by extension, you too." Michael's shoulders slumped, as though the truth itself pressed him down. "What do I do now?" Dennis exhaled. For years, he would have offered solutions, would have opened his wallet and carried the weight himself. But the man who sat here now was done playing savior. "You rebuild," Dennis said, "without my money, without their approval. You stand on your own 2 feet. And you remember that respect isn't inherited from in-laws or bought with checks. It's earned by how you treat people, especially your own blood." Michael swallowed hard. "You're really not going to help with the house?" "No," Dennis answered simply. "That house is a monument to lies. Let it fall. Buy something smaller, something you can afford with your own sweat. Stop living beyond your means and stop expecting me to finance your shame." Tears slid down Michael's face, quiet, unshowy. "I don't know if I can fix this." Dennis's voice softened but remained steady. "You can't fix the past, but you can learn from it. If you want a relationship with me, it starts here with honesty, with respect, with boundaries. I'm not here to be used anymore." For a long moment, father and son sat in silence. The hum of the old refrigerator filled the room, steady as a heartbeat. Outside, spring air carried the scent of cut grass and distant barbecue smoke. Life moved on, indifferent to broken houses and broken pride. Michael finally nodded, slow and deliberate. "Boundaries," he repeated, "not bitterness." Dennis allowed the faintest smile. "That's right. Bitterness eats you alive. Boundaries set you free." The words hung in the room not as an ending, but as a fragile beginning. For the first time in years, Dennis felt the balance shifting, not back to what had been, but towards something new, something built not on guilt or money, but on truth. Sunday afternoon, sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows of Mount Olive Baptist Church, painting the pews in soft hues of blue and gold. Dennis sat near the front, Rosa's grandchildren buzzing around his legs, tugging at his sleeves to show him their school projects. Their laughter filled the air, unburdened, unfiltered, unashamed. "Grandpa Dennis, look," one of them shouted proudly, holding up a crooked cardboard volcano that had clearly erupted more glue than lava. Dennis laughed a sound that came from deep in his chest, freer than it had been in years. He bent low, examining the project as if it were a marvel of science. "That," he said solemnly, "is the finest volcano I've ever seen." Rosa handed him a plate of cornbread warm from her oven. The scent filled his lungs, carrying him back to Maria's kitchen, to nights when family was simple and love was unquestioned. "You need to eat," Rosa said gently. "You've been running on fumes." He took the plate, nodding. "I've been running on anger, but not anymore." Later at the fellowship hall, the choir warmed up voices, rising in gospel harmonies that shook the walls. Dennis closed his eyes as the music swelled deep, powerful, unapologetically black. The sound wasn't too loud. It wasn't embarrassing. It was life. It was his. As the service ended, a friend clasped his shoulder. "Heard about what you did," the man said, admiration in his eyes. "Took courage standing up like that." Dennis shook his head. "It wasn't courage. It was clarity. Took me too long to find it, but once I did, there was no going back." That evening, sitting on Rosa's porch with a glass of sweet tea, Dennis watched the children chase fireflies in the yard. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Michael's name lit the screen. For a moment, Dennis considered ignoring it. Then he answered. "Dad," Michael said, voice steady but humble. "I wanted you to know. We moved out. Smaller place. No more pretending. Isabella." He hesitated. "She's gone." Dennis listened, silent. "I'm trying to rebuild," Michael continued. "Not with money, with respect. If you'll let me." Dennis's gaze lingered on the children laughing in the twilight. "Respect," he said softly. "That's all I ever wanted." They spoke a while longer, their words tentative but real. When Dennis ended the call, he didn't feel anger or bitterness. He felt open. The wound hadn't vanished, but it was healing. He leaned back, the night warm against his skin. Real family, he realized, wasn't defined by bloodlines or last names. It was defined by who showed up, who honored your humanity, who pulled out a chair at the table without hesitation. For years, Dennis had bought seats at a table where he was never wanted. Now he sat among people who valued him without a price tag. He lifted his glass to the fading horizon. To family, he whispered, "The kind that sees me, the kind that stays." And for the first time in a long time, Dennis Brown felt completely, unquestionably free.